Welcome to another handy lesson. In today's video, we're going to talk about the audiolingual method. So stay until the end to know all the details about this ELT methodology. We're going to be talking about the audiolingual method, which was a methodology created by Professor Nelson Brook in the second half of the 20th century. The audiolingual method is based on a behaviorist paradigm of learning. It includes some basic aspect in the structure of its way of teaching. It basically aims for the structural way of a language. It is a very structural approached methodology, which includes a pyramid to establish priorities on the way of teaching. So we have sentences, phrases, morphology, and phonology. In that order, that is the order of importance in which we should teach the content through the audiolingual method. Like I said before, the theory of learning is behaviorism. Behaviorism is the paradigm that says, as we stated in a previous lesson, that we can condition the mind so we can create or get as a result specific conduct from our learners. Well, when we talk about language learning and we bring behaviorism into it, the behaviorist theorists believed that language is a mechanical process that should be learned through different cognitive skills, such as memorization, which is one of the main aspects of behaviorism, just like in the grammar translation method. The difference between grammar translation and audiolingualism is that in the audiolingualism, we also aim for skills such as speaking and listening, of course. So in the theory of learning, we should go for stimulus and response and reinforcement. Stimulus to bring out the behavior from our students, which in this case is the production of a language. Response is that something that we should do to trigger the response from our students. Maybe when we give orders, or maybe when we make a signal with our hands or something, letting our students know that they should respond in somehow with the language. Finally, reinforcement will come through positive reinforcement, giving them some praises, rewards every time they progress with the language. So, like I said, and like what I was explaining, we have the behaviorism paradigm and the learning behavior expected from the learner. Okay, so the organism in behaviorism is the learner. The behavior is what we want the students to do with the language. The stimulus is the content of the language that we are teaching. The response is how the learner answers to our questions or to our teaching methodology. And finally, the reinforcement is telling the students, motivating students every time they make progress, so we let them know that they are doing right. Then we have some conclusions for the approach. Okay, according to behaviorism, the language is learned through mechanical process, through memorization and repetition constantly. Okay, we have some objectives in the audiolingual method. We have short-term and long-term objectives. The short-term objectives is that we can get from our students the ability of listening comprehension, accurate pronunciation, and the recognition of a speech, and of course, the recognition of the symbols. In this case, that means reading. Long-term objective is to reach the native or native-like way of pronunciation of language. That's the main objective of audiolingualism. The syllabus in audiolingualism is, it says here, is based on a linguistic, it's structural, like I said in the beginning. This is a structural approached method. Therefore, we want our students to be accurate with the language, not only in the grammar structures, but also in the pronunciation. So we're going to focus our attention to phonology, morphology, and syntax. Lexical syllabus is basic vocabulary. Basically, what we're saying here is that we provide our students with lists of words that they should memorize, and then we should work on those lists of words through phonology, morphology, and syntax. Okay, there are some techniques to follow when we are doing audiolingual method. Okay, specifically drills and how to bring the language in context. Well, we should drill dialogues. We should exercise through different dialogues. And we should contextualize the dialogues that we perform. We should bring students into real life situations to give them a context in which, or in yes, in which situations they will use the language, that the content of the language that we are teaching in such a case. There are different drills that we should follow. For example, repetition, inflection, replacement, restatement, completion, transposition, expansion, contraction, transformation, integration, rejoinder, and restoration. All of these different drills techniques are part of the audiolingual method. Repetition is simple because all we do is have our students repeat what we say. This is a memorization drill. Then we have inflection. Inflection means that we're going to use the different types of words, and we're going to have students either change those words through word formation techniques, including suffixes, prefixes, or maybe just including the plural form of the word, or sometimes even including the possessive aspect of the words. You know, replacement means we have a sentence and we are changing some words, replacing the words into other words to say the same, maybe, or to say something different. But we're going to be replacing that part. One of those exercises says, for example, the teacher says, I like playing football. And the students are going to say, I like playing basketball. And somebody else is going to say, I like playing any other sport. So that's another replacement drill. Restatement is basically paraphrasing. So when we have a paragraph, we ask our students to say the same or write the same information, but using their own words. And we can adapt the restatement drill for all different levels of teaching, since very basic levels up to the highest levels. Paraphrasing is a good exercise for students to develop the ability of critical thinking and expressing their own ideas through the language. Completion is the basic exercise that we all know, like fill in the blanks, complete with the right form of a verb. So that will be completion. Transposition will mean changing words from place to place in the sentence. For example, we can change the verb and the auxiliary verb just to make a question, and that will create a different way of expressing. We could also change from the negative to the interrogative or affirmative form of a tense, and that will be transposition. Expansion means explaining with detail something that has been said. So, for example, we have a sentence that says, English is easy. That's just the main sentence. But then we want our students to give details. English is easy because, and they will start giving some detailed information about why English language is easy. Contraction, well, is the opposite. We have a whole big sentence and we summarize it and we synthesize that information. So we are able, or we develop the ability to recognize keywords. Contraction will be just contracting words, and it's usually played with oral drills to do some elision forms in the connected speech in order to contract the words. And instead of saying, how are you doing? We say it in a natural way, how you doing? So that will be a contraction drill. Transformation will go from, for example, change it from present simple to past perfect. And then from past perfect, change it to present continuous, and then to the passive voice. So that will be transforming the whole sentences. Integration includes conjunctions and prepositions. So we're bringing sentences, connecting them through different words, and then giving different meaning and creating whole paragraphs. We have rejoinders. Rejoinders mean also to bring words into different contexts and maybe create a different form of a word. For example, if we're talking about the child, then we're going to say the children if we include more people, and then we're changing from singular to plural. and bringing it also within conjunctions and prepositions to connect with other sentences and provide a wider context. Finally, the last drill is called restoration, which is basically having students correcting, finding and correcting mistakes in sentences. If we, for example, write something that says we are using the equipments to the for hiking, okay, students should be able to understand that equipments is not the right plural form of a word, and they should go for the correction of it, which is just equipment, which is a plural form of that word. So all of these techniques belong to the audiolingual method. We need to talk about the different roles of the actors here: the learner, the teacher, and the material. The learner, the learner role is that of a passive active role, right? It's just like a responder. The student is just receiving or waiting for receiving instructions from the teacher, and then the student is just going to respond or react to the instructions that the teacher gives. However, this is a whole teacher-centered methodology because the teacher is the one who's going to be controller, organizer, and the prompter of all the activities based on the teacher own perception of the needs of the students. Okay, and finally, the material that we have here, it says is teacher oriented. That means that the teacher designs or selects the material he's going to use. But there is one basic or the biggest technique in audiolingual method, which is the laboratory. Let's take a look at the procedure, and in the procedure, I will include the language laboratory. This is a procedure of a class using audiolingual method. It says model dialogue, repeat, correction of mistakes, and memorize. So you do that as a teacher. You model the dialogue that you're going to present in your class, have students repeat it, correct the mistakes, and then have them memorize it. Then have students act out the dialogues that you present, and then just present the key structures for the dialogues that you presented or patterns in those structures. Basically, it's presenting the grammar structures. Then you bring textbooks and have students do some drills based on the drills that we already mentioned. But the last and biggest technique of audiolingual method is the follow-up activity, which is called the language laboratory. Let's consider that audiolingual method was brought into the ELT scenario in the 60s, in the second half of the 20th century. The technology back then, it was very limited. So it was a moment when teachers started to bring tape recorders in their classroom. And the main technique was that they should take a day to have all the students pass, listen to tape audio, and repeat that audio themselves. But they needed to record it using the tape recorder back in the 60s that we had in that time with the cassettes, and then we had to record everything, and the students should compare their pronunciation to that of the original audio. That was the main technique. So students became aware of their own pronunciation mistakes, and that also helped them to improve their speaking and listening comprehension skills. That was the key and the secret of the audiolingual method. But it was also the reason of its decline. The decline of the audiolingual method, it was because of this, as it took a lot of time for having student by student doing this process over and over. So if you had a group with 20 students, then you were going to spend the whole week just performing the recording. Because of the technology that you had in that time, it was not that high tech, and it took a lot of time. It consumed a lot of time. Therefore, the result of that is that students were able to pronounce with beautiful pronunciation. They mastered phonology. However, they didn't know what they were saying. They learned how to repeat, but they didn't learn how to express, produce with the language. And that is why the audiolingualism was declined, at least from public systems. However, some schools such as Berlitz use this methodology, and even today uses the audiolingual method in an eclectic way to provide students with the best way of learning. So Noam Chomsky also influenced in the decline of the audiolingualism. Noam Chomsky brought the theory of universal grammar, in which he stated that we should aim for language acquisition instead of just language learning. Therefore, the behaviorist paradigm was out of the scene anymore. And the direct method, which is the next video, was going to enter to substitute the audiolingual method. So, final conclusion. We can say that audiolingualism holds that language learning is like other forms of learning. That is the reason why it stresses the mechanistic aspects of language learning and language use. However, we know that, well, today we know that if we aim for language acquisition, we shouldn't concentrate too much on memorization and repetition drills. So, in your PDF, you have the EducaPlay activity for you to practice the lesson, and I'll be seeing you in the next handy lesson.